Dr. Kim Williams, thank you for your time. We spoke last year and you said in the interview that we did together, nobody should be doing keto. We did an article on that with that in the title, and it got millions of views and it went crazy among both the plant-based community and the ketogenic community. It posted on all of the forums and all of the keto Facebook groups. It caused a storm. What's your take?
Well, if we could just do sort of a time warp, I would modify what I said because there was a great article published in September in Lancet Public Health that actually supported what I was saying, except for one thing, and I would always like to put the caveats in there if they're based on good, hard science. And that caveat was that if you're doing a ketogenic diet with plants, it is not unsafe. And so when I said no one should be doing a ketogenic diet, if I had 2 months of advance notice, I would have said no one should be doing a ketogenic diet with animal products. It turns out that that does decrease mortality, and it does make perfect sense that if you have something like ketogenic diet that can lower your weight, improve your diabetes, and then you're not adding plaque and cholesterol and heme iron and trimethylamine N oxide and IGF-1 in large quantities and all of the things that happen when you're eating an animal-based diet, that you would have good long-term outcome. So maybe a ketogenic diet would be okay as long as you're not eating animals.
Is there enough data to recommend the vegan ketogenic diet?
So the article, the Shikani article, was not prescriptive enough for me to say that I could design one of those things, not being a nutritionist or a chef. Probably some people who are actually in that area could do this really well. But they were talking about peanut butter and high protein legumes such as soybeans and that sort of thing. And so that may be low carbohydrate to some, but it's not extremely low carbohydrate. I think it's very hard to do a plant-based, extremely low carbohydrate diet. But it still seemed to improve outcomes, so there's some level of success with it.
I want to ask about something that's happening on social media at the moment. A couple of people, sort of social media figures, personalities, have introduced fish and a couple of eggs a week into their diets, and they're claiming they feel a little bit better. I'm just wondering if you've got any experience with this and what your take is.
I actually don't, and I'm not surprised to hear that. People will have a variety of illnesses. I would love to know what it is that they're feeling, and if they're feeling, for example, B12 deficiency, for example, that'd be a really good example. Eating small amounts of animal products that gives you a source of B12 might make you feel better. If you need B12, you need it for you to develop blood and nerves, and without it, people can get pretty ill. So with those kind of anecdotes, you don't know what it is that the person's feeling. I know that personally, I started this because my cholesterol was low. If I ate cholesterol in small amounts, when you're eating none, you would absorb so much more of it that it would have a big impact on my cholesterol. However, that sort of curvilinear relationship means that people, adding a couple of eggs to a fully animal-based diet wouldn't change your cholesterol hardly at all. So I worry about it a little bit because of the cholesterol dynamics in the GI tract, that adding a little bit has more impact than they think. But it would, on the other hand, we don't have a lot of data on small amounts of animal products. If you look at epidemiologic studies such as the blue zones, a lot of those populations will eat 3 or 4 ounces of fish 3 or 4 times a month, and they seem to be doing pretty well, live to be about 100 or more. So maybe it's a reasonable idea, but I think it's, other than doing a prospective trial and doing the comparisons that way, there won't be a good way to answer that.
Does this affect the narrative? For example, you've made comments, the quote, of course, is there are two types of cardiologists, vegans and those that haven't read the data. Obviously, the world's not black and white, but does this affect the narrative that everybody can be doing a plant-based diet?
Yeah, I think it's important to stay as evidence-based, and when people, pundits, say quippy kinds of statements like that, they're never going to be absolute. Like the ketogenic thing, turns out plant-based ketogenic is pretty good. And the issue of my cardiology buddies, I really was focusing on the fact that so many friends of mine, now that I'm getting above 60, so many of my friends were having heart attacks, and so if I could upset a few people and get them to read more about nutrition, then that's a win.
But I just want to get it clear in my head what exactly I'm asking, and I guess it's this. Plant-based community, the doctors, for example, claim that interpreting the science, they're coming out, what they're saying is based on evidence, it's based on peer-reviewed evidence. A lot of these people, or most of the plant-based doctors, advocate 100% whole food plant-based diet. But the studies they reference do contain a little bit of animal protein, whether it's population-based studies or case control studies where the subjects are having a small amount of animal protein. So I guess the question is, why are they not saying eat predominantly plants, how you pronounce it? Why are they saying 100% whole food plant-based? Do you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a data-free zone. And so I would love to see more data on small amounts of animal products. Trying to figure out which animal product, if I was going to do one, would I do? It's probably egg whites, I guess, mostly because I don't like fish, and personally. And I would still fear the cholesterol, whereas egg whites don't have cholesterol. But when you look at, if you look at the association between egg consumption and cancer mortality in that Song analysis, it wasn't just cardiovascular and total mortality. They also did cancer mortality, published in JAMA in 2016. And that one said that eggs were more associated with cancer death than processed red meat. And processed red meat is a world-class World Health Organization Class 1 carcinogen. So I'm not sure which animal product I would fear the least. Maybe it would be a small amount of fish, as long as there's something that, but then you have the mercury levels and everything else. So I guess in small amounts that probably isn't the worst thing, but again, it's a data-free zone.
Mm-hmm. What is the number one reason, do you think, that some vegans go back to eating meat and animal products?
I don't know any of these people. I haven't seen, not one of my patients has gone back and said, I want to go back and eat animal products. So I'd have to ask them. And I would love to, it would be nice to actually do a compilation of why it is. Is it inconvenience? Are they feeling weak and tired? Was it the B12 that I was mentioning earlier? So it'd be great to reverse that. I go there and they come here, and I try to do an interview and try to figure it out.
Hey everybody, this is Klaus. I just want to come in quickly and say, firstly, thank you very much for watching this video. Secondly, I wanted to talk very, very briefly about a new partnership. We partnered with a new group called NFI Diet. They provide whole food, plant-based meal guides that go a step further than anything in the past by completely personalizing them. The protocols being studied at a national institute in Europe, and they're getting some amazing results, including rapid weight loss as well as type 2 diabetes remission often within weeks. Please check out the link down below if you want to find out more. Hope you enjoy the rest of the video.
So the one that I did read on the internet, I looked it up because for personal reasons, is there was a gentleman who wrote a thing, I had to stop being vegan because I was too cold. I'm freezing all the time. Why? All of your inflammatory markers go away. And so I put up with it because I know my cardiovascular risk is going to go down with that. And so you wouldn't believe the number of layers I have on right now to sit in regular room temperature. And is that an inconvenience? Not much, okay, not compared to having cardiovascular disease.
Some people have said that they've experienced some gut issues on a plant-based diet, namely well, I won't give the names of the people, there's no point in just using them as examples, but they've said small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. I'm just wondering what your experience has been with gut issues.
It really, that whole story seems to be the opposite of what you just said. That is, the Cleveland Clinic data on giving steak to vegans and seeing that the TMAO level doesn't go up because they don't have the damaging bacteria in their GI tract. So it sort of surprises me. I think that, or it would appear that the plant-based diet, you're not eating the bacteria that are embedded in decaying flesh, which is basically what the meat eaters are doing. And so that does change your GI bacteria, and it should be a positive. But maybe that's not for everyone. But again, data-free zone.
I guess it's a data-free zone because so many factors come into health, like the environment, alcohol, what you drink, what you do, lifestyle, pollution, all that sort of thing. So it's really hard to kind of pinpoint whether 100% whole food plant-based diet is better than 99% plant-based. One thing I was going to say though is I've noticed that both sides, keto and the plant-based sides, they both kind of misrepresent each other. For example, the ketogenic people say, we've tried the low-fat thing, and then they point to studies where fat was like 30% of the diet, which obviously that's not low-fat. That's not truly low-fat. And in the same way, I remember you in our previous interview said a ketogenic diet increases mortality by like 27% or whatever it was, maybe 31%, I can't remember the study. But if you actually look at that study, they didn't do keto. So I'm just wondering, like, do we sort of lose credibility when we make these claims?
So that is a really good question. Is more worse? And the actual more recent data, Sakani was the first author. It was in Lancet Public Health again. I know I referenced it earlier. It came out in September. That actually didn't just talk about at point A of ketogenic diet. It actually had the continuum. The title was really talking about low carb and high carb. What is the optimum amount of carbohydrate in the diet? And forgiving them for not being able to cull out processed carbs versus dense carbs that you get in like whole grains. They weren't able to parse that out, but they showed very clearly that as you increase carbohydrate, you actually increase mortality. And as you go on a low carb diet, it increases mortality even more. So the slope on the upside was kind of low, very much like the PURE trial saying that high carb is worse than eating fat. It is. But the low carb line was actually very steep. And so what you're saying is true. Everybody's not doing 100% low carb. They're doing a fraction of low carb diet. And there seemed to be a very linear relationship between how low carb they were and how much mortality they had.
That makes sense. One thing might be good to go over is why there's, just for people that may be new to this and are interested in lifestyle and they maybe see vegan as not looking very healthy, why they're overweight or unhealthy vegans?
Well, there is the unhealthy plant-based diet index that was published a couple years ago in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, showing that animal products were not the worst thing. It's kind of like the PURE trial. Worse than animal products was refined carbohydrates. And so if people are doing white rice, white sugar, white flour, and those refined carbohydrates, probably because they increase insulin levels so much. Insulin is a horrible growth hormone in terms of taking nutrients and putting them in cells. And to the extent that that happens, you are much more efficient at taking the fuel in and then storing it instead of dumping it in the stool. And so that effect, it was probably a good thing centuries ago when there was famines but in a time of plenty, we do end up with more obesity.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm just thinking of the people that might watch this and need the information. Could you just provide an overview of the sort of the sort of benefits of a plant-based diet?
So I would say, based on all the data that we have, you have so many phytonutrients, high fiber content, that if you look at the minerals and the vegetables, or the minerals that are in the vegetables, you would come to the conclusion that this is how most land mammals actually eat and sustain themselves. And the largest land mammals on this planet are all vegetarians for that reason. And so we do have, you could talk about the vitamins and minerals and phytochemicals. Those are great. Those are probably way outside of my areas of expertise. I'm much more of an expert on what not to eat. So when you're eating animals, you're eating a variety of substances. And I say that for the last 50 years, we've been working on or focusing on cholesterol and saturated fat. But in recent times, we've found that there are other things that happen when you eat animals that we should be concerned about. One of them is heme iron. Heme iron is something that we all thought we should be eating, because you need the iron to build up your bloodstream and the red blood cells. However, if you're eating it from animal blood, you're getting oxidized iron that apparently increases reactive oxygen species. I can't, say that mechanism is absolutely correct, but the observation that heme iron increases cardiovascular disease is actually pretty well shown. Probably the one that people, if you're really interested in heme iron, take a look at the National Institutes of Health AARP outcome study, where they say that the biggest problems are nitrates, nitrites, and heme iron. I don't know that you could compare that with TMAO, a four-letter word that everyone should know pretty soon. It stands for trimethylamine N oxide. And TMAO is actually a compound that is highly associated with heart attack, stroke, death, and heart failure. And it's a measurement that hopefully is going to be something that everyone could have their own TMAO level done and find out how much risk they have. And it's driven primarily by eating animals. And if you're eating animal products, particularly the choline that's in the animal products gets turned by gut bacteria into trimethylamine, and then your liver changes that into trimethylamine N oxide. And that correlation, there's some mechanism for causality, such as making the blood more likely to clot by turning on platelets in the bloodstream. But even if it's not causal, the correlation between heart attack, stroke, death, and heart failure with the highest levels of TMAO mean that it's something that we could try to avoid. And maybe you could swap out all your bacteria in your GI tract. Maybe you could come up with an enzyme blocker to stop the oxidation of it in the liver. But you might just stop eating the substrate that leads to it in the first place, and that would mean doing a plant-based diet predominantly.
You mentioned TMAO. I just want to get your thoughts on what I saw in the Joe Rogan podcast recently. It was the one with Chris Kresser, who's a paleo advocate. Chris Kresser said TMAO there's a lot of it in fish, which is considered to be one of the healthier animal products. I just want to know why that is. If fish is so healthy and it has, how does that work? It's got so much of this chemical, but it's considered to be healthier than other animal-based foods. Maybe it's TMAO is more innocuous than how you're making out.
Reversing the question, if TMAO is so bad for you and it's in fish, why does fish come out as better than eggs, red meat, processed red meat? And I think the answer is pretty easy, that yes, the TMAO, you don't need the bacteria or the liver to make the TMAO. And I would say if it wasn't for TMAO, mercury, polychlorobiphenyls, PCBs, saturated fat, and cholesterol, fish might actually be perfect. But as it is, it does increase cardiovascular mortality slightly. It does increase overall mortality. That's the SONG analysis of nurses' health and health professional follow-up study published in Journal of American Medical Association in 2016. Why on many studies does it come out as improving outcomes? It appears to be a substitutionary benefit. That is, if you, take fish instead of red meat, and apparently if you take red meat instead of processed red meat, you improve mortality. And so that can be interpreted as a positive in a relative term, but certainly as an absolute, there's a slight increase in mortality if you're using fish, dairy, or white meat, chicken, that you wouldn't have to deal with if you were substituting vegetable protein for those sources of protein.
And can you provide an overview of the evidence that supports the fact that a plant-based diet is optimal for human health?
So I would say most of our best evidence would actually come from folks like the Adventist Health Study, where they look at vegan versus lacto-ovo-vegetarian versus semi-vegetarian versus pesco-vegetarian eating fish versus the regular American diet. And what you see is that the only group of the Adventists who is not on average overweight is the vegan population. And then if you look at the amount of diabetes, hypertension, heart attack, they're all substantially lower in the vegan population. So longevity has increased significantly in their vegan population. So, that it is epidemiologic. There may be, the big criticism of it is, particularly on mortality data, is that vegans are different. I'm sure that's true, that, if someone who is thoughtful enough to change their diet and sort of buck the trend of, going to American restaurants or, and navigate this inside a family that, for example, that doesn't follow that kind of diet, these people are different. They're, some people say that, vegans are smarter. I know there was one study that said that vegan children have 16-point higher IQ. Well, is that because the parents are smart enough to make them vegans, or is it something to do with brain development? Hard to take that seriously. So those studies really are confounded by behavior differences. That I used to say, I'd never seen a vegan who smoked. I actually met one. But in general, there's a healthier profile. There's more exercise. And so it could be that going plant-based is a marker for wanting to do something for your health and being more careful. You probably show up to your doctor visits. You probably wear a seatbelt when you're in a car. I mean, there's probably loads of reasons that the population who does plant-based nutrition comes out better. Now, that isn't to shoot the whole thing in the foot. There are good biochemical mechanisms, as I mentioned, of why plant-based diet would end up with less diabetes, hypertension, heart attack, lower cholesterol, stroke, and death. But it may not be as simple as we think. And that's why lacking prospective randomized trials. It's hard to be absolutely definitive, and when it comes to making guidelines, people will say, oh, that's really nice. People did so much better on a plant-based diet, lowered their diabetes by 78%. That's really dramatic. It's better than anything else we have. But you can't make that so-called Class 1A recommendation because it's observational, not prospective. So, it would be nice to take identical populations, do twin studies, one vegan, one non-vegan, have them come out and see long-term what the differences are. I don't know that we're going to be getting that kind of data, though.
What tips do you have for people to do the plant-based diet correctly? I
think it's important for everyone who is doing a plant-based diet to use a variety of foods. We all say that you get plenty of protein from plants, and that the major source of protein for most people who are not plant-based are animals who actually ate plants to get the protein in the first place. And that seems to be not recognized by many people. But I have met the protein-deficient vegan who had been very, very selective in what they were eating instead of eating a broad base of plants to get all the nutrients and amino acids that a person needs. Be kind of rare and unusual, but it can potentially happen. I would say that it's important to make sure that you have B12. The iron, you hear people talking about having low levels of iron. Well, hopefully you would do that by increasing the frequency of eating high iron foods such as spinach and kale, knowing that the phytates and oxalate can sometimes stop the iron absorption, so you have to eat it multiple times if you're iron deficient, not being able to absorb it all at once, for example. And so in my area though, none of these are the issue. Cardiovascular disease is a problem of trying to get people away from saturated fat and away from cholesterol, and making sure that they're taking B12, because B12 comes from the soil bacteria. Cows eat it, all of our big animals actually eat the dirt along with what nobody's washing everything for them. For humans, we tend to wash everything, and so we're not eating that. We don't have a good source of B12 unless you take a B12 supplement. And then on the other side, it's really important to watch how much you're doing, because high amounts of B12 supplements, if you're older, male, ex-smoker, it's associated with lung cancer development. So my biggest warning to the plant-based community is just to stay abreast of how you're doing biochemically. But that's true of people who are not doing plant-based diet. I would be more concerned about the ones who aren't than the ones who are.